This video is about process costing using the weighted average method. So if we're a home builder and we're building a home in New York and we're building a separate home in Fairbanks, Alaska, we'd probably use job order costing to keep track of the cost per job. But if we're making soda pop, and so we're taking some carbonated water and some flavorings in the syrup department, and then we're sending that stuff over to the bottling department, we might instead use process costing. So we want to tell management how much it's costing us per gallon to bottle it, how much it's costing us per gallon to make the syrup, and then month by month we can see whether our costs are going up or down. Because remember, in management accounting, we're answering the question, how are we doing? We're trying to help management. This video is about the weighted average method, which means the costs that are in beginning inventory this month, even though they were incurred last month, we're going to include them in this month's cost structure, as opposed to the FIFO method, which says, let's take last month's costs, which are in beginning inventory, preserve them, and then finish those units up using this month's costs. We're going to use the weighted average method in this video. Three things before we go any further. The flow of costs is the same. Materials, labor, and overhead are going to flow into work in process, but instead of going directly into finished goods, they're going to go into a second or a third or a fourth process. And we're going to tell management each month how we're doing on our cost per unit in process number 1 and process number 2, etc. Secondly, when we're trying to figure out how much it costs us per unit, we're going to look at it from 2 points of view: materials and conversion costs. We're going to call our labor and our overhead costs conversion costs, because we're going to take labor and overhead and apply them to materials to convert them into something else. And the third thing that's the most challenging, but really isn't that hard, is equivalent units. We're not going to finish everything every month, but we got to give ourselves credit for the work that we do. So if we have 1,000 units that are 50% complete, that's the same as 500 complete units. 1,000 units that are 50% complete are the same as 500 complete units. So we call those 500 equivalent units. All right, let's take a look at this problem. These guys make water skis, and they have 2 processes. They've got the molding process and they've got the packaging process. And for this problem, we're looking at the point of view of the molding department. And we're trying to figure out, of these costs that came in this month, how many went into the next process and how many dollars stay in our process as ending work in process. The first thing it asks us to do is to compute the physical units of production. So before we even talk about dollars, we got to get our brains around how many units were in beginning inventory, how many got added, and how many moved on. So you just have to use a little common sense. In this example, there were 0 units in beginning inventory. They gave us 50,000 new units to work on, and that means we have 50,000 units to account for. It tells us that we had 2,500 units left, so that means we must have moved on 47,500 to account for the total 50,000 units. So in the real world, our workers know that 47,500 skis went into the next process. 2,500 skis we're still working on. Our job as accountants is to tell management how many dollars went with those 47,500 skis and how many dollars stayed with those 2,500 skis that we're still working on. The next part asks us to determine the equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs. This is where it gets a little complicated, but it's really not that hard. Let's look at it from the point of view of materials first. Well, we know that 47,500 units went out. Well, we can't move them on to the next process until they're complete. So we know that those 47,500 units are 100% complete. Units in ending inventory, it tells us materials are entered at the beginning. So once we add the materials, there ain't no more materials to add. Hence, they are 100% complete as far as materials go. 47,500 transferred out, plus 2,500 units left in an inventory that are 100% complete means that we did 50,000 units worth of work as far as materials go. As far as conversion costs go, those 47,500 we sent out, they had to be complete, otherwise we couldn't have moved them on. Here's the tricky part. There were 2,500 units left in ending work in process in the molding department. They were 40% complete. 2,500 units that are 40% complete are the same as 1,000 complete units. In other words, 0.4 times 2,500 is 1,000. So 47,500 that went on, the 1,000 equivalent units that are left, means that our equivalent units as far as conversion costs go are 48,500. Part C says compute the unit costs of production. Well, we have $510,000 on materials costs. If we had beginning inventory, those dollars that were spent on materials would be added in. But in this case, there were 0 units in beginning inventory, so all we have to do is worry about the $510,000. How much work did we do? We did 50,000 units. So our dollars per unit is $10.20. How much did we spend on conversion costs? 92,500 plus 150,000 is 242,500. Dollars per units. How much work did we do? As far as conversion costs go, we did 48,500 units worth of work. Dollars per unit. 242,500 divided by 48,500 units means that our conversion cost per unit was $5. Direct materials of $10.20 plus conversion costs of $5 means that our total cost per unit is $15.20 this month in the molding department. Part D asks us to determine the cost to be assigned to the units that transferred out. In other words, these 47,500 units that went out, how many dollars went with them? Those 2,500 units that are left, how many dollars stayed? Well, what went out? What went out is 47,500 units that got transferred out at $15.20 per unit. So in other words, 47,500 units that went out at $15.20 a unit means that $722,000 transfers out. What stays? Well, those 2,500 units that are left, they are 100% complete as far as materials go. So 2,500 times $10.20. We also have 1,000 equivalents left as far as direct material conversion costs go. $5 times 1,000 will give us 5,000. So our formula is 2,500 times $10.20 plus 1,000 times $5 means that 30,500 is our ending work in process inventory in the molding department. The last part of the problem asks us to create a production cost report, and all that is all that work we just did on one piece of paper in one place. First thing they want to know is to account for the units. Well, we had 0 in beginning work in process. They gave us 50,000. We have to account for 50,000. How do we account for them? We transferred out 47,500. We have 2,500 left. So we can account for all 50,000 units that we were in charge of. Next, we're going to account for our equivalent units. The units that were transferred out, 47,500, were 100% complete. Otherwise, we could not have transferred them out. So as far as materials go, they are 100% complete. That's 47,500. Those 2,500 that are left, they're 100% complete as far as materials go, because remember, materials are added at the beginning. Once we add the materials, there ain't no more materials to add. So as far as direct materials go, we did 50,000 equivalent units worth of work. As far as conversion costs go, again, those 47,500 units that we transferred out have to be complete. Otherwise, we couldn't transfer them out. Those 2,500 that are left are only 40% complete. 2,500 units that are 40% complete are the same as 1,000 complete units. So that means as far as conversion costs go, we did 48,500 equivalent units worth of work during January. Then we're going to do the same kind of calculation that we just did. We're going to look at our total costs Again, if there had been beginning inventory, we would have added those costs into this number, but there weren't. $510,000 for materials. We did 50,000 equivalent units worth of work. Dollars per unit, $10.20. Our conversion costs during the month of January, $242,500. Dollars per unit, 5. So our total costs during the month were $10.20 for materials, $5 for conversion costs, or a total of $15.20. Our costs to be accounted for, there were $0 in beginning work in process. They gave us $510,000 worth of new materials. We added $242,500 worth of conversion costs. So our total cost to be accounted for are the $752,500. How do we account for the $752,500? Well, we told you that we transferred out $722,000. So 47,500 units transferred out at $15.20 a unit. So that's $722,000. What's left is 2,500 units as far as materials go. That costs us $10.20 a unit, or $25,500. As far as conversion costs go, we have 1,000 equivalent units left at $5 a unit for $5,000. So we can account for $722 that transferred out, $25,500 that stays in as ending inventory as far as materials go, $5,000 that stays in our department as far as ending inventory for conversion costs go. So son of a gun, we can account for all $752,500 that we were in charge of. So in summary, if we make a whole bunch of the same stuff every month, instead of using job order costing, we might think about using process costing, helping management figure out how much it costs us per unit each month. And we'll look at that per unit cost in each of our processes to figure out if we're going up or down. And to do that, we're going to use the concept of conversion costs. Labor and overhead are conversion costs. And we're going to use the concept of equivalent units. So, for example, in this problem, 2,500 units that were left in ending work in process that were 40% complete as far as conversion costs go are the same as 1,000 units that were 100% complete. And when we use the process costing method, we can figure out how many dollars move to the next process and how many stay in ending inventory. And we can tell management how much it costs us per unit each month in each process. All right, I hope that helps.